Hi there, Drutter here. It's April 17th, 2020. Today is the 33rd day of my lockdown diary. And before I get started with a few other things, I thought I would show off my tomato plants. These are Amish paste, heirloom, organic tomatoes, and these are Sweet 100 cherry style tomatoes. Oh, baby, baby. And I have some lettuce that needs to be thinned out a little bit. Squash starting to come up. A few of those in there. And I got some MK Ultra cannabis plants here. Oh, whoops. Kind of hard to show them under the light there, but I have 6 or 7 of those little seedlings, about 20 days old. And now I think let's get into some statistics and news. Some armed forces were deployed in Quebec today, Eastern Canada. It was a small amount, and they are specifically medically trained or medically experienced armed forces at this time. Of course, that may change. And there are some other highlighted headlines from around Canada right now. Apparently there's some potential drugs available for treating this illness, but there's no silver bullet yet. What might be, though, is silver. Anyone tried this particular brand of colloidal silver? About to give it a shot. I'll let you know. Sorry about the construction noises. Still living in a construction zone here during lockdown. This is the garlic. There's 40, and they're doing pretty well, so I'm going to be eating garlic this summer. This is new here, this bunch of RVs. There's 4 or 5 of them here. There was 1 or 2 of them in there last summer, but that was during the summer. This is a lot more and a lot earlier, so I don't know if this is people that didn't have any other option and decided to not pay the rent and get out of there and just live the camper lifestyle, or this is an early spring tour of some kind. I don't know. It looks like they've been building up over the past few days. There was 1, then 2, then 3. Now there's 5, so not sure about that. Something you used to not be allowed to do was cover your face unless you were a specific religion and gender. But now in Canada, if you're traveling, you must cover your face. You must have a non-medical homemade mask or face covering on your face at all times. Before anyone says it's only for air passengers, it's not just for air passengers, it's also for boats, ships, trains, and automotive vehicles. In other words, buses and other vehicles. It's for all travel. Anyone traveling anywhere. In fact, very soon it's going to be said that all public places, outdoor and indoor, including bus stations, buses themselves, trains, train stations, airports, airplanes, parks, anywhere there could be other people, you're going to have to cover your face now with a non-medical homemade face covering. This article here in Canada is about the social distancing measures that have been in effect for a couple of months now. And the first paragraph says, hundreds of Vancouver residents have called to complain about their neighbors not physically distancing, despite repeated pleas from the provincial health officer to maintain a distance of 2 meters apart to stop the spread. And a couple of things jump out at me. One is that the reason for this social distancing is supposedly to stop the spread of the virus. And that's how I understand that viruses, especially respiratory viruses, are spread is through droplets and coughing, sneezing, even talking too closely to somebody perhaps. So, and of course contact or passing an item that is infected from one person to another, or touching a surface that's infected. So it's all about physical contact or being in close proximity. So I think that's why they recommend social distancing, and I think that is a smart thing to do during a pandemic. If there is a real pandemic, then the correct response is to be careful about how close you are to other people, and to sort of spread throughout society the idea that we want to slow down this spread. So if people can maintain a distance of 2 meters apart, the more often the better. And they have gotten very, very strict about that. I'm not here to talk about that specific aspect of it. It has gotten very strict, and now there is this snitch line. That's the other thing that jumps out, is this snitch line. People calling the government and the police on each other for not being far enough apart, not doing anything to them. No one, someone's attacking me with a gun or something. No, it's not that. It's, I saw somebody being too close or physical with someone else that I don't think that they were supposed to be close with, right? That's that's how far we've gotten now. We're snitching on each other for that very thing. That's gone very far. But I think that the idea that the illness spreads through contact or close proximity is the point here, and that is supposedly the reason behind social distancing. Now, it has sort of taken on a different form. If you look at the CNN article now, they're talking about something called quaranteaming. It says people are ditching their homes and joining their friends to avoid social isolation. It's called quaranteaming. Okay, so the story is about two friends, I can't even pronounce their names, Lichia and Nulita Vong. They've been doing vlogs online and dancing around in colorful bandanas and so forth in their apartment. And they are a quaranteam, they say, which is loosely defined as a group of people you choose to live with and choose to share germs with during the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, so it says here, quote, selecting a team to quarantine with has become a way for some to escape the isolation that comes with stay-at-home orders mandated across the U.S. To avoid being alone, some have ditched their respective apartments or homes and moved in with friends instead. Doing so has allowed people to still abide by the orders, but it has provided them with in-person human interaction that's lacking. Okay, but it's that in-person human interaction that we're actually trying to avoid. So by quarantining, moving in with increasingly large groups of people that you aren't actually already sharing germs with, you're doing the opposite of this. So it's very disturbing that CNN is on their front page talking about and advocating for quarantining, going and sharing your germs with more people than necessary during this time, moving in with additional people that you're not in a relationship or in a family with. So, in other words, large groups of friends joining together. What? That's the opposite of social distancing and social isolation. So whether or not it's social distancing is important in this, that can be debated, but I'm not actually talking about that here. I'm talking about how it's hypocritical and strange and paradoxical for CNN to say and promote this idea of moving in with larger groups of people and people that aren't even in your family or friends group that you're not sharing germs with. Now you're choosing to share germs with a larger group of people during a time when that is what we're trying to avoid. And then if you scroll a little bit further down, it says that celebs are even getting in on the act. Of course, former Bachelorette Hannah Brown, and I don't even know who these people are, a bunch of people on a TikTok, I don't even know what that is, an app, I guess. The group has been frequently posting videos of themselves doing challenges, joking around, 3.5 million likes and so forth. So these people are, friends, I guess, or co-workers, or did vlogs and blogs and stuff together, and now they're actually living together and sharing germs on purpose. And it is being promoted by the media in a time when there's actually snitch lines for people. Like if someone comes over and drops something off at my back fence and I go out to them, say a family member that's helping me out or something, if that were to happen, I might get snitched on. Or there's people snitching on people going to the park and they're on blankets in the sun, which is actually very good for you, soaking up vitamin D, but they're trying to get people to stop doing that. So they're snitching on people that are sunning in the park, even by themselves or with their family members that they're already sharing germs with. So this idea of quarantining is very strange. And then if you go further down, it says others find their germ pod. Others find their germ pod. Some, like Lana, have not fully moved in with others. Instead, the 28-year-old has created what she calls a germ pod with 4 of her friends who live half a mile away or so in California. And then says she lives alone, but they choose to see each other during this social distancing period. I think that part of this quote, I think part of this is the most important is actually about the level of trust that's built, she told CNN. Like knowing we're all implicated in all of each other's decisions and needing to communicate and trust each other fully. That sounds like sexual partners that are talking about STDs, doesn't it? Isn't that weird? During the day, she stays at her place, working as an organizer. She sleeps at her own apartment, but she says she goes to her friend's apartment almost every day post-work and pre-sleep. I couldn't do this alone without all them, she said. So there's groups of people now that are not just not quarantining and not social isolating and not social distancing, but they're specifically creating a germ pod, which is people that they don't live with, and they're going and visiting and sharing and traveling and being with these people on a regular basis for comfort and for friendship and for intimacy, and then spreading back out apart again and living in their own apartments or in own houses or own situations. Now that seems like an exact recipe for spreading an illness if you're going to. So, and CNN repeatedly talks in this article not about social distancing, but about the stay-at-home orders. This is now becoming, it's morphing. It's not really about the illness anymore. It's about government orders to stay at home. This is about a lockdown, really. About a lockdown which is becoming a permanent fixture in our lives. It's about a lockdown. It's about obeying government orders to stay at home. It's not really about not spreading the illness anymore. We're only going through the motions. For example, another example of just going through the motions is putting gloves on everybody, putting rubber gloves on everybody. Say at the grocery store, for example. So you put a pair of rubber gloves on and you wear them for half an hour or 2 hours or whatever until your next break and you take them off. That does not protect anyone. It makes it look like you're protecting people because customers say, oh, gloves, I see gloves on that person, that's clean. That's not clean. They've touched food, they've touched customers, they've touched money, they've touched cards, they've touched devices, they've touched everything with those gloves because they rarely change them. So it used to be cleaner when people actually would wash their hands in between customers, or say if I worked at a fast food place, I would wash my hands. But now you see them putting on a pair of flimsy plastic gloves. And they touch the food, like at Subway, they touch the sandwiches, they touch the till, they touch the money. And then they don't even change the gloves half the time. So, you know, this going through the motions of not spreading an illness actually can spread an illness if you don't understand how it spreads, if you don't understand the chain of infection and how different illnesses spread different ways. This is a respiratory illness. There are viruses coating the inner sections of our lungs and of our airways, and so when we breathe or when we cough or sneeze, little particles of those come out. That's how it spreads. And those droplets can land on things and be touched, and in a certain amount of time they're still viable. The virus doesn't really live long outside of people. It doesn't. It only can spread inside people, it can only replicate inside human cells, and it can only live outside of human cells just briefly in moisture. And then at the wrong temperature, at the wrong moisture level, etc., it dies. If it touches sunlight, it dies, etc. Water, soap, anything can kill this thing. So it's very fragile outside the human body, but it spreads when humans contact each other, when humans are close. That was the whole idea behind the social distancing, and it's now morphed to stay-at-home orders, really. And people still, saying, "Oh, we're obeying the stay-at-home orders." That's right, you are obeying the stay-at-home orders. You're staying at home, but you're doing it by mixing with more and more people in more and more different ways and having germ pods and things. That's the opposite, actually, of social isolation and quarantine and distancing. We're no longer distancing. We're only obeying government stay-at-home orders, and that's what the media is focusing on, is that stay-at-home order. So next you'll see snitch lines for people that aren't staying at home, right? It's not really about the virus. You probably saw about a week ago a guy went surfboarding or something all by himself, and a bunch of police boats showed up to arrest him because he wasn't staying at home. He was socially distant, he was social isolating, he wasn't spreading the virus in any way or risking anyone, himself or anyone else. But he wasn't at home, right? See, it's becoming about being at home, being inside, being in prison. We are all now in prison. And those of us that can see it are trying to tell the rest of us, hey, we're in prison in our homes with all these new rules, all these new regulations, all these new restrictions, many of which will never be released when the virus threat is under control. That's the danger here, is that these changes are permanent. And I've feared that since the beginning. And I've said we must ensure that they are not permanent. And it does appear that it's becoming more about stay-at-home orders and less about actually worrying about whether or not this virus is spreading. It doesn't seem to be like we're really worried about the virus spreading. Because you know what? They've already told us that every single person on the planet is going to get it. So why are we really trying to isolate? It's mostly about slowing the spread so it doesn't destroy the healthcare system and result in a bunch of people dying that don't need to die. That's what it's supposed to be about. China just added 1,300 new deaths. So they're sneaking on about 1,300 new deaths per day that came from previous deaths that happened, I don't know when, maybe February or so, when they were in their midst of their crisis and lockdowns. But ever since then, they've been reporting no deaths, and I've been mentioning that recently. They've been maybe 2 deaths, 3 at the most, usually 1 per day, sometimes none. And they are the least affected country. Now, that number there, 3, is how many deaths per 1 million population. And no one else is anywhere except for Russia is the other one that's anywhere near that. But so you are 40 times more likely to die of this illness in the US than in China, according to official numbers, even though they are adding 1,300 deaths per day now. Oh, good. BC is preparing to ease some restrictions in May. Oh, wait, it says maybe. And only if certain things happen, like only if cases and hospitalizations continue to fall. And the only thing that's going to be changing is some elective surgeries are going to be returning to hospitals. That's the only thing changing. Maybe some schools are going to go back in during the summer holidays. So in other words, nothing actually is being talked about changing. The only thing that might be changing is elective surgeries, which is really not a big deal. None of the social changes, none of the, distancing, none of the lockdown, none of the essential, what's considered essential and what's not, none of the complete broad sweeping changes to the economy are going to be undone. Apparently they're talking about nothing like that happening. It's just a maybe. It's funny how they stay up front. Oh, BC is preparing to ease the restrictions in May. Well, it's a maybe, and the only restriction that they might ease is elective surgeries. Everything else they're talking about at least until the summer, and a lot of it is going to be permanent. They're saying now we need to wait for a vaccine. Surprise, surprise. Before I talk about these data and a couple other graphs, I just wanted to mention, as you can see here, my camera lens is very scratched. I'm sorry about that. I have been using the same camera. It's a 12-year-old Canon model. Has served me well, but it is very banged up, very scratched up. And I'm just barely holding it together with tape, almost literally here, just to keep things going. And my audio, it may not be very good, so hopefully this records properly, because yesterday I had some missing audio. It was just all static in that part of the video. And as you can see, I'm just aiming my camera at the screen. Very low tech here. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get the information across, so just wanted to apologize for that. Now, I mentioned this chart yesterday. This is interesting. This is the steepness of each of these countries' lines basically indicates their capacity for dealing with the illness and how well their healthcare system is functioning. So I talked about these 3 yesterday being kind of more moderate and being probably more along the lines of accurate data, more accurate data. And I was saying maybe there's something going on politically here with this US data. In the past couple of weeks, it doesn't seem to be that they could be losing so many people so rapidly for no apparent reason, except for possibly political. I don't know. And these numbers are politically low here, China and Iran. And we talked yesterday about how Germany's numbers may be different in the way that they're reporting them. And someone corrected me and said that also may be that Germany does have a stronger healthcare system than other countries. So maybe that's what's going on here, as opposed to Italy and other places that aren't doing well. Like the US, I guess. So maybe that is the case, but I think that there is some bias number, misreporting of data going on here, and also errors. There's errors. There's purposeful errors, and there's willful manipulation of the data probably going on as well in some of these cases. But anyway, this shows, it's an update, it shows that the US is still on a crazy trajectory. Their healthcare system is not handling this, apparently, according to this. The deaths are increasing, exponentially. And in China, things are still just chugging along. Here, this is daily deaths, and the latest day today, just finished on the right here, April 17th. It was one of the worst days. I don't understand, this was not actually the right numbers. Some of these deaths got moved onto this day somehow, I think. Not sure. But anyway, this was going very exponential up until the beginning of April. And then the lockdown, which started about here, kicked in. Takes a couple of weeks for deaths, a lagging indicator, to start changing around. But this next peak, next high, wasn't as exponential as was expected. And then this peak is not as exponential as expected. It should be curving, hockey sticking way up like that by now if this were to have continued, which was the fear, that this was going to be uncontrollable, uncontainable, and that the lockdown would not blunt the number of new deaths that we're seeing, but it has. So this number's big. I don't think it necessarily is quite right. It should have been somewhere a little bit lower. But anyway, we are flattening out, obviously, in deaths, and that's a good thing to see. And then one more chart is right here, total deaths, and the linear is not as important as the logarithmic on this one. And it shows that it did seem we were veering down off of that steep path toward 1 million and then 10 million deaths. But it was curving downward. In the past few days, there has been a few deaths, unfortunately, a decent number being added there. So it's not curving down as quickly as hoped. It's not flattening. To flatten this curve basically means there are very few or no more new deaths happening, but that's not the case yet. And I'll just keep on watching those numbers, watching these charts, watching these stories. Thanks for following along, and see you tomorrow. Stay healthy.